So it's actually probably a blunder to shove here with king 10. I think this one is going to have to fall in the bro category. I think the river shove is just really bad. It's kind of atrocious. On this week's episode of Bro or Pro, we flat and under the gun open from the big blind. We check raise a 10 high flop. We overbet turn and we shove river. All for value. The board does run out a bit dicey on us. The shove on the river might be questionable. So let's get into it. Let's find out if I played this hand like a bro or like a pro. King 10 suited. We'll call. We'll flop top pair. We maybe check raise. Check raise at some frequency here. Maybe against under the gun. I'm not sure how often we check raise. I think it's a half pot bet. Check raise frequency goes down a little bit, but it's still there. Yeah, we're gonna check raise here. All right, so in the video I say a couple things about check raising. I say against under the gun, I'm not sure how much of a thing check raising is, and against a half pot sizing, I'm not sure how much of a thing check raising is. But then I say I'm sure it's still there, just not sure at what frequency. So I guess let's just get into Pio and find out what Pio has to say about check raising flop. All right, guys, I briefly went over this in my last video, but if you're not familiar with PioSolver, the interface might look a little bit daunting at first, but it's really nothing to be afraid of. Basically, what you see here is like a 13 by 13 typical no limit hold'em hand grid. And then the way to read this grid is, here is, for instance, here's under the gun's hand range. Well, okay, we'll start with me. Here's my flatting range from the big blind facing under the gun. As you can see, I'm just range checking. Green just means check. So all of these hands are hands that I have, and the color of the squares corresponds to the action. So here, in position can bet half pot or check, and then each square tells you how often each holding is betting half pot or checking. So for instance, here if we look at kings, well, if you see over on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the king of spades, king of hearts. You see it's betting 49.2% of the pot at a frequency of 70.17% of the time. So that's how you read this. So it's actually pretty straightforward. So as you can see here on this board, villain is doing, actually one more thing we can do here is look to see how each player's equity is distributed on this flop. So basically by clicking these two buttons here, it tells you how much equity each of our holdings in our hand range has. So as you can see, this is my range here. I have some very high equity hands like sets, tens, sevens, deuces. Two pair seems to be pretty high equity. And then I have some pretty high equity hands here, top pair. And then I have some very bad equity hands here like 6-4 of hearts. I actually don't even have, I don't really have any hands that, I guess at this point in the hand it's a little too early for any of my hands to be just completely trash. But I mean, 16% equity is obviously very, very bad. And then here, similarly, is the in position player's equity with all of his holdings. So like he's got all of these very high equity hands, all these big pocket pairs, top pairs. He doesn't have a set of deuces, but he has sets as well. And it doesn't look like he has any two pair here either. So we're actually doing we're doing all right on this board, right? If we actually look at the range explorer, it'll tell us how much of each sort of hand category we have. So this is the in position player. So this is under the gun. He has an overpair. Here he has 24. He has an overpair here about 11% of the time. He has a set 3% of the time. He has top pair 13% of the time. So he's like top pair plus, I don't know, 25% of the time. Change players here. This is my range. I have top pair 10% of the time. I almost never have an overpair, and I have a set 5% of the time. So I actually have about top pair plus about 15% of the time as well. So no player is doing significantly better than the other on this board. Let's get back to the browser here. So villain does bet half pot, and in game I say against under the gun, like I'm not really sure how much I should be check raising this holding. I have king 10 of hearts, remember? I'm not really sure how much I should be check raising against a half pot size bet. I'm not really sure how much I should be check raising. So here, if I hover over king 10 suited, if you look over there on the right hand side, it says I should be raising 3% of the time and calling the remaining 97% of the time. So I'm mostly meant to call with king 10 suited. If I look here at the EV of each action, if you look over on the right hand side, it says raise half pot is worth 37.5% of the EV, and calling is worth 37.5% of the EV. So another thing to note here, anytime you see Pio mixing two different actions, regardless of the frequency, so here it's like we're barely ever raising with King 10 suited, but I mean, we still are at a very small frequency. That just means the EV of both actions is going to be the same. So the EV of call and the EV of raise are going to be the same. It's just if I'm raising King 10 suited here 99% of the time, like I'm just going to be way overdoing it, and I'm going to be unbalanced in some way, and villain would be able to exploit me had he known that that's what I was doing, right? So at the end of the day here, like check raising King 10 suited doesn't lose me any EV, at least in theory, so it's perfectly fine play. I will say that my frequencies, my estimation of the frequency at which I'd be raising, check raising, was just way off. I figured it maybe be like 10, 20%, about 10% of the time or something, but it's actually much significantly less than that. But if we do look, like what are our main raises here? We have our sets that really want to raise, or that at least they don't really want to raise. Like again, you see the EV of call and the EV of raise is the same. And that's for all of our sets. And then we have our two pair hands that want to raise. And then we have some bluffs that want to raise as well. Some straight draws with some back doors, some straight draws with some front doors. A bunch of front door flush draws get raised at some frequency. Yeah, that's it. One interesting thing to note is we don't really have any hands that are pure raises. Oh, I guess 9-6 of spades and 9-6 of hearts are pure raises. That's interesting. So I guess these 9-6 of spades and 9-6 of hearts, 9-6 of clubs, these hands are just a little bit, they're too weak to call with a gut shot, but they're too strong to fold. So they just prefer to raise. And if we actually look what villain's meant to do when we raise, let's take a look here. Villain's meant to fold, start mixing fold with a bunch of ace highs. Villain's meant to call all of his 10x, call or raise all of his 10x. So, and as you see, like he's raising when he has a 10 with the flush draw. Makes sense, right? He just got a bunch of equity when he has that type of hand. He's meant to mostly just call with sets, with a set of 10s. And with a set of 7s, he has a higher raise frequency. So one reason he might be raising more often when he has 7s than when he has 10s is when he 3-bets the flop with 7s, my main calls are going to be hands with a 10 in them, like ace 10. So when he has 10s, he wants calls, right? If he were to raise here with pocket 10s, he wants to get called. And I just have a bunch fewer calls in my range when he has pocket 10s because it blocks me from having ace 10, king 10, queen 10. All of these 10x hands that might be calling a raise. Anyways, back to our decision here on the flop. Like I said, there is no EV loss raising king 10 here, but my frequencies are definitely out of whack. I definitely thought I know in some more wide range configurations, like maybe button versus big blind, I would imagine the check raise frequency with a hand like king 10 here would go up a bit, and that's just because ranges are a bit wider and a smaller portion of villain's range would be jacks, queens, kings, aces. When villain's range is really wide, he has a bunch of hands that dilute his range, but his under the gun open range is actually fairly narrow. Like it's not super narrow. It's not like a 3-bet range or anything like that. But as far as open ranges go, it's the narrowest open range villain will have. And so that just means like a larger percentage of his range is going to be stronger hands. So therefore, like a hand like king 10 maybe isn't as strong as it could be, as you might think it would be at first glance, basically. Okay, so we do end up raising, and villain ends up calling. So let's go to the turn and see what happens. Oh god, we run so fucking pure, guys. Probably check. We either check or we overbet. I think we're gonna overbet. Oh, fucking hell, I can't even overbet. 25, 35. All right, so in game I exclaim how good we run, which is true. I definitely run better than anyone I know. And then I talk about my first instinct there is to check. And I think the reason my first instinct was to check is just that the king is going to be much better for villain's range than it is going to be for ours. However, you see, I sort of had a second thought there, and I said, well, I guess we either check or overbet. So typically in these spots um, where we check raise flop and the turn doesn't really improve any of our check raises, and it often improves villain. That's a spot where we're going to want to be betting very polarized, right? We're going to want to, like, on the flop, you saw our main check raises were a set of tens, set of sevens, set of deuces, two pair, those types of hands. On this turn, most of those hands still are very strong, right? Some of our two pair gets demoted a bit because villain makes some two pair. Villain also makes a few sets on the king. So it's just a card that's just better for him than it is for us. Like, he has more hands that improve on the king than we do. We have almost no hands that improve on the king. So in that situation, we really just want to, with our nutted hands, we just want to bet really big. And with the rest of our range, we just want to check. So in game, I decide over bet or check was the strategy I'd be using. But here, if you look at Pio, so the king of clubs lands, if you look at Pio, it looks like Pio is exclusively using a bet 75% strategy, so 3/4 pot strategy, and it's never overbetting. So this is going to make the rest of the hand analysis a little bit tough to do. One thing that I can do is create a subtree and basically just rerun the solver from this decision point and give it just the overbet size, since that was the size I landed on in game, and that'll better approximate sort of what the appropriate strategy should be for not the appropriate strategy. That'll better approximate which hands will go into my betting range when I'm using only the overbet strategy. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll see what Pio has to say about overbetting here. Okay, cool. So like I said, I reran this, giving the solver my particular strategy, which was to use an overbet or check strategy. And if we look here, looks like this drives our bet frequency down to about 15%. So 15% of our range will bet, and the rest will check. And if we look at the strategies for our range, it looks like we're mainly overbetting with our sets, right? That still makes sense. Sets still want to overbet. And then some hands that block sets, it looks like. So like 9-10, 10-8, 9-7, 8-7, 7-5, 7-6. And even hands like 10-7, our two pair hands, are getting checked quite a bit. Checked at full frequency, actually, right? So they don't even make it into the overbet range. So you see here, we're going to have a very, very polarized betting range here, mostly sets and bluffs. And then if we look at our holding, King 10 here, you notice there's a very small frequency overbet with King 10. So again, all that means is that the EV of overbet and the EV of check are approximately the same for this whole exact holding for King 10 of hearts, for instance. So that means we aren't making a mistake when we're overbetting. But again, my frequencies were way off here. Like, I would have thought King 10 was a slam dunk overbet on this turn, and it turns out like it can be overbet, but it's mostly a check. So anyways, we do overbet, and if we look at Villain's reaction here, he's actually meant to raise us quite a bit. He's meant to jam hands like aces. He's meant to jam sets, kings, tens, sevens. And he's meant to call with some of his nutted flush draws, combo draws, and some of his nut flush draws. No, this is still a combo. No, his nut flush draw with a pair makes sense. Nut flush draw with a pair, two pair, flush draw with a pair, flush draw with an open ender. So it's actually pretty natural. He's meant to just really call his big hands here, and then the rest of it is pretty clear. He just folds. He just does a ton of folding. So I actually think Poole probably plays fairly close to this. I don't know if Poole would be jamming like tens here at a very high frequency, or aces at a high frequency. Right? They might just call in slow play and play the river. But other than that, I mean, I think this sort of strategy kind of approximate what Poole would be doing. So far, I don't really see any giant exploits that, like, I don't see any deviations from the solver strategy that would make me really want to change my strategy quite yet. So villain does call, and let's go to the river. Uh-oh. So we're not folding if he shoves. Yeah, if we check and he shoves, we're not folding. And I think we can get value from worse hands if we shove ourselves. He's got the nuts. That's a bummer. That's a bummer. Okay, so we see the Queen of Diamonds on the river, and in game I say, well, if I check and he shoves, I'm not going to fold. And if I shove, I think I can get worse hands to call. Let's actually take a look at Pio and let's see what our strategy is meant to be here on the Queen of Diamonds on the river. Okay, the Queen of Diamonds falls, and I'm actually going to uncheck this square size proportional weight just so we get a better view of what our range wants to do here. So looks like we'll be shoving straights, we'll be shoving flushes, and we'll be shoving bluffs. Do we shove sets? Yes, we'll be shoving sets as well. Sets of sevens. We won't be shoving set of tens. Interesting. I wonder what's going on there. Shove set of deuces still. And then we shove bluffs. So it does look like we want to be betting we want to be shoving polarized here. And it looks like our two pair hands probably don't make the cut for shoving. So if I look here at King 10, King 10's pure check. And there's actually a pretty significant EV loss to shove King 10 here. So in game, my thought process was that if I check and he shoves, I'm going to call. So I might as well just shove. But let's actually see what's meant to happen when we check. So we check, and now villain is meant to shove flushes, lots of flushes. Villain's basically only meant to shove flushes and bluffs, 7-7. So he's actually going to check back a lot of hands that we beat. Like ace queen, for instance, aces, queen 9, queen jack, king 7, king 10 we chop with. So I guess what's happening here, the reason why we do still want to check, even though we're not going to, well, let's see, if he shoves, yeah, we don't ever check fold king 10. But I see what's going on. So if we shove, we're only getting called by better hands. We're getting called by flushes, sets. Yeah, queen 10 is folding. Yeah, so if we shove, we're only getting called by better hands. So that's never a situation you want to be. If you're value betting, you have to be getting called by worse hands by definition. Otherwise, it's not a value bet, right? So if you value bet and you only get called by better hands, you shouldn't have made the bet. So it looks like shoving this river here, we only get called by better hands. So that's a pretty bad play. And if we check, sometimes he checks behind hands that we beat, which is great for us. We win the pot. And sometimes he shoves and we call, and we win the pot when he's bluffing, when that's the case. So how big of a blunder is it to shove king 10 here? It looks like it costs us about 6-7% of the pot, which at this point, it's a very big pot, right? It went check raise on the flop, barreled, over bet turn. So 6% of the pot is a bunch of chips, and I would say it's probably a blunder to shove here with king 10. So if I were to score this hand as bro or pro, I think this one is going to have to fall in the bro category. I think the river shove is just really bad. It's kind of atrocious. So hopefully we learn from this one. We think it through a bit better next time. We sort of realized, we sort of did a half-assed analysis there on the end of like, well, if I check and he shoves, I'm not going to fold. And if I shove, worse hands will call me. And it turns out no worse hands are going to call us if we shove. I mean, look at this. This is about the wettest river we could have seen. I'd be surprised if he even calls us with like king queen on the river, which is a hand that beats us. And I think he's still going to be folding it. So that just goes to show you sort of how bad a value shove would be here with my hand. So I think that's a pretty big mistake. Other than that, I think the hand was played okay. Again, like some of my frequencies were a bit out of line, but other than that, no big deal. The EV, I didn't make any big EV errors until the river. Yeah, that's it. So if you enjoyed the video, please like, please subscribe. It really helps me out if you do that. I should be posting one of these every week. I've been having a really good time making the videos. I've been learning a lot making these videos. which is great. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying them. And that's it. So thanks, guys. If you want to catch any of these hands live, I do stream on Twitch most weeknights, Monday through Thursday for sure, and sometimes on Friday from 7 p.m. Central to 10 p.m. Central. So check me out on Twitch. And I guess that's it. Cheers, guys.